Hello, everyone, to our monthly webinars. And today I have a great pleasure, and this is a great honor to me to present you Dragos, our famous Dragos. So those of you who attended any Kanban system design class, you know Dragos already very well. This is how I met him a couple of years ago, and actually recently I also had a chance to meet Dragos in person. So today, Dragos comes to us with a bit different topic. So we are not going to talk about XIT and Microsoft. We are going to talk about leadership, but Dragos will share with us his huge experience in terms of working with leaders and helping leaders to develop. Before we move on, just one facilitation reminder. So please use a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I will be monitoring Q&As and I will be also monitoring chat, but it's easier if you ask the questions in the Q&A box, and we'll go to the Q&A after Dragos' presentation. So Dragos, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Let me recover from that introduction. There are a lot of people in the audience that I learned a lot from, and a lot of people that I had the pleasure to work with or collaborate, co-train, co-teach, co-coach, and so on. David White, I still remember, what was it, like 9 years ago? We were doing workshop in Silicon Valley for Yahoo and other clients. So yeah, it's been a while. Sorry, I love to be here. I will introduce something I'm working on, actually, a theme and a couple of ideas that I hope you'll find useful, and I will reserve time for answering questions. So let's see how the technology will support. My connection has been fluctuating today a little bit. So leadership, oops. And Anna, just as a test, can you see and can you read the words on the screen, please?
Yes, I can see leadership and I can see lead.
Lead, okay, in gray, all right. So first of all, I understand that the audience ranges, again, I see names of experts and people. I'm also learning something anytime I meet with them. But also I assume there are people who are new, perhaps to the Kanban method and to the topic. So just a review, in the Kanban method, we have a set of principles. We have two sets of principles, but here I'm showing the change management principles and the 6 practices that we have. And for this presentation, I will focus on one that I usually get a lot of questions during workshops or at conferences. It's also something I focus on in my current role. I work for Adobe. I'm not here to represent Adobe. I'm here to talk about Kanban. However, many times people ask the question, well, how can you encourage acts of leadership at all levels? There's only one leader, that's me, or right? Or you have a leadership team. In this case, I want to clarify what we mean if you ever have those questions. I also will bring up the scientific method and how these two things are related. I will not review all the principles and all the practices with you. There are books and experts and seminars you can sign up for. So moving along with the concept of leadership, we look at leadership as an act, as an action, not as a position. When we ask this question, and at least with some of you here, I know I co-trained and worked across different countries, across different cultures. Usually when you ask this question, how many acts of leadership do you see in this question, in this picture, the answer is somewhere between none, 1, and 4. And it tells you a lot about the culture that you're in. High trust cultures will say, obviously, there are 4 acts of leadership. Not so much cultures where trust could be an issue that you have to help building up as a coach is when you get answers as of 1 or none, right? So in the context of Kanban, we really, when we talk about leadership, we talk about collaborative leadership. And the fact that regardless of the prevalent leadership style, with Kanban, we want to produce an environment in which individuals have a collaborative conversation and do something about the problems related to their work. It can happen at team level, it can happen at program level, or it can happen at organizational level or at a leadership team level. I just came up from a workshop with the leadership team, and I have seen dramatic changes between the current leadership team and the previous leadership team. So again, how do you enable that honesty? How can you move from a command and control where one person dictates to an environment where people can collaborate? So that's what we're trying to do with Kanban, and that's what we tried to do even before it had a name, before it was called Kanban, and before it had a set of principles and practices. And yes, I'm talking about going all the way back to the XIT times in mid-2000. Next, we spoke about the scientific method, and how are these two related? Well, first of all, if you're familiar with it, and anytime you try to solve a problem, it starts by asking a question, right? Like, why do we have this problem? You may do some research, you may construct a hypothesis, and then you go and you test this hypothesis. By the way, this is what we encourage with Kanban, and this is what agile methodologies encourage overall, right? And at some point, change happens. And based on that change, again, you have a collaborative conversation, and you co-create perhaps something new. What is the next problem you're trying to solve, and you go through these cycles. What I want to point out is that I always believed in collaboration and co-creating answers with the people I work with. I also want to extend this to methods, and the way I look at methods, the way I teach about methods, the way I encourage people to look at methods, it's not about expecting to be told what to do, right? So to that regard, methods do not provide answers. They help us ask better questions because we have a different context, no matter where we are, no matter what we do. High trust culture, low trust culture, one is not necessarily better than the other. They're just different. And our attitude as coaches and trainers has to meet the client where the client is, or the customer, or could be a family member, right? Could be, your own family or my own family. So it's not a whole lot different, right? So answers emerge. These answers emerge as a result of asking these better questions. So really, for me, this whole theme here, how do I know? How do we know we're going to deliver on time? How do we know what to work on next? How do we know what to prioritize? These are conversations, and there are additional questions that you can ask. So let's take a look at some examples. Something that I use in my coaching materials or training materials, and again, it's rooted in Kanban. It's really at the core of Kanban. How can we accelerate the delivery of solutions from concept to consumption? These are just examples, right? How can we create and maintain predictability of our services, or how can we strengthen relationships with customers? I use these three questions, and I talk about them when I conduct Kanban coaching training or static exercises. And by the way, as a side note, I'm not here to sell anything. I work full-time for Adobe. I hung up my coach and trainer and consultant hat, and I do internal work for Adobe. I don't go around the world selling any services. So I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm speaking to you from my heart about how I work and what I find helpful, and what feedback I get from others that they find helpful. So next, KTLO here stands for keeping the lights on. You may call it maintenance, you may call it sustained engineering, or business as usual. Here are some examples of some questions where I like to ask, or I like to help the team find the answers based on their own context, right? They need to understand their demand rate. They need to understand their delivery rate. As a result of that, there's an impact to their backlogs, right? The backlog may be growing, or the backlog may be depleted. And you also probably some of the experience that you can actually eliminate the backlog when you do proper maintenance and when you have a really good process in place. I experienced it as hands-on. I experienced it as consultant. It does take time, but you can also accelerate that time. Again, if I think back to how we were able to do this, was really helping a team understand and visualize and track their demand rates, their delivery rates, their impact to backlog, and then you follow that with prioritization and some team agreements, right? Other questions. Again, I will make this available in PDF to Anna so she can distribute. I'm not going to read through all the slides. I'm just showing examples of the 3 questions that I showed earlier. These 3 questions, how do they apply in this case to, or how they can apply to sustain engineering? Again, I'm not telling you that you should ask these questions every single time. I'm giving you examples, and the answers will be different. Even if you have maintenance teams in the same organization, I'm in an organization of, let's say, almost 400 people, almost about 40 teams, more or less. And I will tell you that they each have a different Kanban board. They each have a different context. They have a different flow. They have different work in progress limits. And one thing they all do, though, about once a month, oops, let me get these buttons right. About once a month, each one of these 40 or so teams, they get together with some other teams into a 1-hour meeting that we call a fitness review. And here are more questions, right, that evolve. We don't ask this question one by one. We don't go in order. It's pretty much a manager or someone we call a practice lead will bring up their cumulative flow diagrams, their control charts, and other things we built in Power BI for our own. We used to use actionable agile tool set, and then we had to build our own, and we built our own in Power BI, right? But each team describes what delivery looks like, which is that ratio I described earlier between demand and delivery. What does their flow look like? Whether or not their cumulative flow diagrams and control charts show any trends that they want to bring up. This is not an audit. They do not come here to impress anybody. They're just coming here to share their lessons learned for the past month and for those data points and the impact their action have on customers. So again, it's just different examples on how we are asking these different questions in order to get different answers. So the most important part is to build a common understanding of why you are asking these questions, what outcomes you seek to create, and to make it specific to your context. I've been in situations where I was asked to work with an organization and to design a board that each one of their close to 60 teams could use and they could implement in some tool. I politely declined to do that. It's not a good pattern to say, here is a board, roll it out to all your teams and have everybody mechanically go through these steps. More things for, so on this slide, I am not, I take the 3 questions and I'm providing the why the way I usually use it in a PowerPoint presentation, but try to make this your own. If this is a place for you to start, feel free to take this and use it. Add your own comments, add your own reasons why, but make sure you understand, for example, the customer needs, right, all the way at the bottom, right? Do you understand the customer needs? And have you implemented pull systems that are based on those needs? Again, the demand and the delivery rates play a big role in here. Focus on the end-to-end process in order to improve quality and predictability. The other thing that we do in fitness, in our fitness review, we use past data to create a forecast of when future work is going to be completed. So we use Monte Carlo simulations and we use forecasts. We do not use estimates. That's not, I'm not saying we never use estimates. Sometimes you have a new team. Sometimes people do need to put their thinking hat and come up with an estimate. However, they are not being held to those estimates. Once they start to deliver real work, those estimates get adjusted. The most recent example we've had, we estimated that to release a new service would take about 1 year and 5 months. And we start to track. 3 months down the road, we found out a lot of dependencies. We found out why, many ways to accelerate what we are doing. And to make a long story short, we after the first 3 months, we started to use these forecasts. The initial forecasts confirmed the 1 year and 5 months. Make a long story short, we delivered in 5 months, not in 1 year and 5 months. Why? Because we kept asking better questions. We kept understanding what is holding teams back and how we can accelerate that delivery. We're doing that in these fitness reviews compared with some other cadences that we have. So it's really, I would say, I would summarize this as a motivation for implementing Kanban or perhaps other system if you choose. But the outcome is not to practice Kanban. The outcome is to deliver business results and to satisfy customers. So next, for those of you who are not familiar, how do you do this with Kanban? We have this series of exercises called static, which stands for a systems thinking approach to introducing Kanban. There are 6 sets of exercises. In my own practice, I've had 8. I have now a set of probably 12. I don't use all of them with every team. We do have a set, I believe, 4 or 5 that we start with. And then after we have a workshop, we follow up with some post-workshop coaching, if you want. And in there, we may conduct some of these exercises after the initial workshop, right? It could be 2 days or 3 days, depending on whether it's in person or if we do it remote on Microsoft Teams or Zoom or things like that. The 6 exercises here, the number 1, it starts with sources of dissatisfaction. Then you analyze in demand, you analyze the capabilities of the team that you work with. We model the workflow. We identify classes of service and design the Kanban system, which is the final board that the Teams is using. And from my own practice, this is pretty much what it could look like, right? We explain the change management principles and practices. We start to elicit these narratives, right? And the first exercise is this one, with these bubbles, where you get statements from people, right? We're asking the team members what inhibits delivery of their services, and we're also asking customers or representatives of customers what they say about what the team delivers. So you have this range from where team members may say, we don't know what the priorities are, to the customers say, perhaps, your team is always late, or you don't understand our process, you're too slow to react. Again, these are examples, these are trends. I used to use this in a slide. I use similar slides now, but these are trends that I have seen pretty much worldwide. These are common questions that come from each one of the audiences. Then it looks like that in real life. We have, let's say, if I have 3 teams, what you see there you see some groupings. On top, you have internal feedback. Below, you have external feedback from customers. And then from left to right, we go from the very first team to the team downstream from them, and to the next team downstream from the second team. And we relate that to customers and to their feedback. Based on that, you find themes. You can further look at demand and delivery rates. You start to build your workflow, and that could be in many different ways. And in the end, you end up with a Kanban board. So pretty much that's the way I would summarize the static exercises. Once you have a board, then you have some practices like the daily stand-up. For us, we have daily stand-ups, we have retrospectives, and we have fitness reviews that the teams have. The team reviews their metrics perhaps every 2 weeks or so, and then someone is presenting those metrics to the leadership team every month. And we also have teams clustered based on their value stream, based on the services they provide, or based on customers they serve. Could be different patterns there. But that's pretty much what you want to get out of implementing Kanban, right? It's not about getting certified. It's not about the certification or about, deploying a methodology. It's really about the outcomes that you have. On this slide, this was a 4-month engagement, and we worked with one team. The board was wider. It had, at some point, there were like 3 teams. There were 3. The whole organization had those 3 swim lanes. So each swim lane is a different team. And we started from the top when we built this board. May look busy, may not look like much, but I want to show you the results this team had. And by the way, despite all the sticky notes that you see there, they were using Jira, and every single ticket you see, there's a ticket in Jira. However, They had this big room where they're meeting daily to have their stand-ups. I didn't ask them to do this. They surprised me. They started to print labels they would put on top of sticky notes. Why do you think people get the motivation to do that? In their case, it's because it was working and they were seeing the difference. And here is where that difference comes in. When I started to work this organization, in the chart below on the left-hand side, what you see as 2,400, 224, that's the amount of work in progress for about 40 engineers. So yes, when we started, they had 2,000 things in progress. And then we figured out, hold on a second, that sounds like a bit too much for 40 people. Do you really need to have 2,000 things in progress? They were surprised they had 2,000 things in progress. They didn't even know how much work they had in progress. We counted it. So again, visualize it. Just by showing a team how much work they have in progress many times surprises them. And it surprises me that organizations and teams don't actually know how much work they have in progress. So that's the first thing to visualize and to show. We went to 400 and we went to 200. And at some point we said, okay, now that I observed your delivery rates, which by the way are below, are those little blue stacks. Let me see. So about 50% of the work, why do we have two colors in there? Because one represents how many features they were releasing, the other one, how many break fix issues they were working on as a result of their deployments to production. So you can see a ratio about 50-50. They deploy 6 things and then they have 6 issues in production. They deploy 6 the next time period, they have 7 issues in production. Then they deploy 8 and they have 8 issues, right? So about a 50-50 ratio. At some point, what happens? The same team that was delivering only about 12, 13, or 16 things, the same team starts to deliver 36 plus 11, 47, 59, okay? And then something happens and you see it go down, but I will tell you what happened there. But isn't that amazing that this happened about 2 months in? So in about 2 months, this organization that was constantly delivering between 13 and 16 things, now they deliver 50 and 60, right? Somewhere in a range of 50 to 60. What happens and why you see a decrease in the last 2 stacks, it's not because their productivity decreased, was because we figured out that with all this hyper productivity they're having now, there are other problems to solve in the organization. So we split the team. We take several folks, or not several, we took maybe about a fourth of the people there, I don't remember exactly, and they start to work on this bottom lane. We're not tracking that work in this chart. The numbers that you continue to see are the numbers for the people remaining who continue to deliver work in the first swim lane. To me, this was a fantastic achievement. And the achievements, the outcomes that we've had here were similar to XIT. It's just that in the XIT story, I had no formal training. There was no Kanban. There was nothing. I was learning about theory of constraints from one of David's first books called Agile Management. I met David, you know the rest of the story. But it took us about a year to get to these results. Over here, it was done with this team. We started to see these results 2 months after I started, and I was only going there 1 week on, 1 week off. So I was only going there every other week. So I thought it was a fantastic improvement. Again, there are a lot of questions they were asking each other. This is, again, you see a picture of that board, and you see the large room with people online. By the way, all the people on the screen are in Ukraine, in Kharkiv. Kharkiv, 2 different ways of pronouncing it. I've been there, and they invited me to Ukraine, so I was there maybe 5 years ago. It starts with someone, I remember this meeting started with someone in Ukraine saying, I'm stuck, right? And then someone else says, well, I also need help. They were talking, right? And this was a stand-up. And by the way, you see all these people in here, this meeting was still taking about 15 to 20 minutes. Once we got good at it, initially we were taking 45 minutes, but we got to do it in about 15 minutes. And then we have all these conversations, right? And the questions start to pop up. Okay, well, let's focus on value. John, what do you need first? Now, John is the person with the back towards the camera right here with a hat on, I think it says Sabres. He was in a different group. And this is at a point in time when we are starting to get these groups to talk to each other. They stopped talking to each other a long time ago because they're not delivering the group in the room that was delivering work to the group in the back. They're not really delivering anything to them. They're professional services. And they had to deal with customers who are always upset about the lack of delivery. And now the collaboration starts. Now they deliver a lot, they deliver faster, and they start talking. These conversations are important, and they really reflect individual acts of leadership. Nobody has anything to hide. Everybody is honest. And once they had the answer to why the guy from Ukraine was stuck, the guy on the screen who says, I'm stuck, really was, well, they said something to the effect, and that's Google Translator. Okay, if you speak and you write Ukrainian, don't hold me to that. It's probably incorrect in some ways, but it says, hey, if we would have had the proper Jira training, we wouldn't be stuck. Remember how 50% of their work was break fix issues? It was because almost nothing was documented. So part of what one of the next things that I advised and they did was to bring everybody from Ukraine to Charlotte. This was in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the United States. And they had proper training and proper documentation of all the automation. They had some really amazing and crazy automation in Jira, but it was not documented. It was in someone's head, and people were making assumptions. So again, continuous acts of leadership. And what I learned about 2 months ago that, well, I knew that he was doing this and I heard from him, but about 2 months ago, his name is Axe. He was by Axe, the gentleman in the picture. He actually wrote a book. And, you know, he published this book recently. And again, this is about 6 years after he experienced Kanban for the very first time, and he experienced Agile for the very first time, I believe. So he took this to the next level, like many other people did. Here is a picture with my first picture, the first picture with the team in India. That's the XIT team. And that's David's book that I mentioned earlier, Agile Management for Software Engineering. That's the book I was reading and playing with the theory of constraints. Not going to go into all the details, but we had very similar results to what you have seen here. I also want to point out that in this picture, you see work in progress for this team was 60 to 90 things. It came down to only about 10. And then we improved delivery from about 6 things per quarter to somewhere of 40 and 50 per quarter. And then we eliminated the backlog in a year and a half. A backlog that when I started was about 200 things and growing, we were able to eliminate it. Again, a lot of questions. This is the precursor. This is the precursor to the book. This is a screenshot of the paper that was presented in Barcelona at the Theory of Constraints conference. And I highlighted really that my drive and what I was talking to the team about was really how can we collaborate and how can we enable simplicity. How can we just make a few simple changes and collect less data, spend less time on overhead and bureaucracy and more productive tasks? Why did I say this? Is because when I started to quantify what the team was doing, they were spending about 40% of their time trying to clarify requirements. So that's all Outlook work. The team was in India. All the customers were in Redmond, Washington, or most of the customers, or could have been distributed, right? You know, back then we didn't have conferencing, we didn't have all these tools for collaboration. So it was taking days and days and days just to get answers to everything. So we said, okay, 40% the team is spending time on writing emails and another 40% of estimating. And when I looked at that, that's 80% of an engineering times capacity. I said, of course, it's clear why they cannot deliver more than what they deliver. And I said, you know, I figured I took it upon myself to solve those issues, to make sure that the team only works on things that have clear requirements. So I had to learn really fast and to help mitigate some of these things and also collaborate with customers to make sure that whatever we prioritize to work on, like 10 things instead of 90, those are things that the engineering team can actually work on and deliver versus wasting time on asking questions about what customers meant. We also, because all the data we've had, we replaced estimation with a forecasting model, the same thing we do at Adobe today. And part of why we have the successes that we have. Um, you will see this in the slides when you get them. You may recognize the picture from some other books. This was a different implementation. This was at Corbis. David Anderson was director of engineering. Then the books start to be written. Also, Dan Vacanti was actually leading the stand-up. So Dan Vacanti was part of this team, and you're probably familiar with his name, his work, his book, and the tools he created. And then Dominica De Grandis was also part of this team. So I just want to point out that we did not create theory, and Kanban is not coming from an academic field. Kanban really comes from people like you, people like you see in these pictures, people who come to work, who have deliverables to make, and they want to enjoy the time there. They also want to add value, right? We want to see the results of the time we spend away from family, and we want to find the purpose in what we do. And it's amazing to me how many books, and this is just a small sample of the books that have been written in the past 10, 12 years or so, that are really inspired from the daily work and from the daily asking of better questions, really. When you look at these methods, right, when you look at these ideas here that I'm bringing up, you will see some tendencies. I work with organizations who believe that power came from positions of authority, right? Versus organizations who believe that power is great in a collective team, but everybody takes these acts of collaborative leadership. Sometimes you can help one to, transition from left to right, transition from command and control to a collaborative leadership. Sometimes you cannot, and sometimes you don't try to do the transition, but you can still help. And I'm not saying that one is good, one is evil. The truth is probably somewhere in between. They both, may work best in certain situations. However, they look very much very similar. So that's what I want to point out, that in each one of these situations, whether if you look at this slide and you kind of think of the screen of left side and right side, the behaviors, the people, the work on the walls in the back of them, they may look similar, but their approach could be completely different and confusing. So in one situation, you have a push approach to work, the other one has a pull approach to work. The results will also reflect the approach you take in work. And that's a matter of choice. How do you choose to work? How should you work, and what is appropriate for you? How you approach work. The next slide is kind of a takeaway. I don't want to read through it. However, I collected over time, what I call collaborative leadership patterns or leadership patterns, and I'm sharing them with you. So write your own statements, write your own ideas, because this will help you then frame the questions that you need to ask in order to get these different results. When I started with this, and Anna mentioned XIT, I had not much knowledge. I had no knowledge of Lean. I learned Lean after, and learned about Lean after I read about theory of constraints. I wanted to read more. Many of you here have a whole lot more knowledge than I've had back there. Well, I was pretty much a clean slate. But what I've had was the motivation, again, to simplify things and to work with people who enjoy coming to work so we can enjoy our time together. And you know the rest of the story. So that's what I wanted to share with you. And now I have a closing metaphor, and I will ask Anna again to help me here. Anna, can you read the word? That's also a good sign whether or not Anna can hear me, and you can
Yes,
hear
I
me?
can. Yes, I can hear you.
All right. Can you read the word, please?
Leadership.
Leadership. Okay. And how about focus on those 4 letters again?
Still lead.
Lead. Lead. Okay. Lead and leadership. Well, at some point, I wasn't trying to be funny, but I was working with a customer where let's just say there was a lot of command and control, and the methodology was heavy push, and they had so much work in progress that their statements were, we cannot deliver anything, we're stuck. So I'm going to bring something else on the screen, and I'll let you take a look at this. And Anna, given the context of this picture, how do you read that word?
So that's LED, if I'm correct, but I'm non-native speaker, so please correct me if I'm wrong.
LED, yes, it's LED. What if the word leadership is loaded with LED? And instead of leadership, you have maybe leadership. So just like the two methods, push and pull, are so similar, it's very easy to translate this, whether or not you have leadership or you have leadership in your organization. It's not insulting. It's just that lead is really, really heavy. And my message in closing and the metaphor that I want to leave with you is to lose the lead and lead instead. So yes, the weightlifter. I think I was teaching a train-the-trainer class for Kanban University in Seattle. And someone with whom I became a really good friend came up with this. We're trying to figure out, and I asked the class, the trainers in that, the future trainers who were participating in that class, I asked them about the essence of Kanban. And part of it was weightlifting, right? So this is not about me. It's my gift to all of you. I'm sorry, I'm a man, so it looks like a man because I am. But the weightlifter is really not gender bound, right? Whether a man, a woman, anybody really can be a weightlifter and help their organization to optimize the workflows for all these things, high performance. And then, you know, could be those three things, could be other things. But that's pretty much what I felt I wanted to share with people when Anna asked me if I have something I want to share. So,
thank you very, very much, Dragos. As always, it was a great pleasure. So I'm at the moment we don't have questions, but I would like to ask you one thing. So you are talking a lot about encouraging the acts of leadership at all levels, and that in high trust environments, it's basically everyone is invited. In all environments, everyone is invited, but in high trust environments, it's easier to introduce this act of leadership at all levels. But did you maybe had a situation where people were not keen to take the acts of leadership? I'm now talking from my experience where I met a group of people who were, when I invited them to take these acts of leadership, to discuss, to talk about some ideas and improvements, the feedback was that, and I'm kind of citing right now, we don't like democracy here. You are here to tell us what we need to do, and we'll do it. Which was a bit shocking to me because I thought that people don't like micromanagement, but here they are. So I'm not sure whether it was like one-off experience or maybe you have seen something similar.
oh, many times.
Okay.
It's not unique experience. It's also interesting how when something happens to us, we think we are in a unique experience. At Microsoft, everybody believes when I was working with this team that is a unique experience.
Okay.
And, you know, this team can deliver anything to save their lives. So figure out what content, what is it that you need to retain, what knowledge, if there's anything that can be retained and transferred, and build another team, which meant, you know, get rid of this team. And when I went to meet the team, I saw that they didn't really have quality issues, perhaps because they weren't delivering much, but and everything was taking very long. So you don't start by telling people to take acts of leadership. I never start that. This is something I think we use in the training materials, and what you want to do, you want to inspire, you want to show them how to get there. And you do that with questions, right? You do that by saying, hey, what's holding you back? That's probably the first question. What do you think is holding you back? Or what problem? Why am I here, right? And they'll say, well, we can hardly deliver anything. We used to deliver a lot, and then things started to take weeks, then months, and now it feels like the only thing that get delivered are the ones we escalate. So you have a stakeholder say, if I don't escalate a ticket, then nothing gets done. It usually is a relationship between how much work they have in progress. So perhaps, what I lead from that and say, okay, tell me more. And I look at the data, I start to come up with strengths. So I do it on my own as a consultant, right? When I used to be a consultant or as a manager, and you start to take some trends, understand what are the demand rates, what are the delivery rates, what happens to your backlog, how long does it take this team to deliver anything? From there, we do the static exercises. Sometimes I do static and I don't call them static. I would call it a discovery workshop. Let's do a discovery workshop. So help me understand more about your work. And you do static. They don't know you do static, but you are asking the questions and say, let's take a look at your work. Where do you track your work? Let's say it's Jira, right? So help me understand, what does that workflow look like? So sometimes you ask them to start by showing their workflow. Other times you do traditional static where you say, hey, forget about the boards you use right now. What is the flow of work? What work item types flow through this, right? So you start to, without calling them classes of service, you help them group work in categories that may be classes of service. It doesn't really apply to everybody, but like it may apply to a specific line. To another one, it's maybe just a matter of understanding prioritization. And I have been surprised how many times these organizations don't have a prioritization model. Pretty much they had one and they abandoned it because the only way for them to get anything done is to escalate. So whether it's low trust or high trust, be flexible. I would say, we need to be flexible in our approach and be sensitive. They are there for a reason. They work a certain way. They get paid to work that way, and someone is telling them to work that way. And we're not there to criticize, right? We're there to just create an alternative for them.
So always ask the right questions, right? Let me take a look at some other
questions. I can read.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
When you try to investigate, do you have one-on-one discussions with people in teams to find their frustrations, or only with the entire team? So typically, if you are a consultant, you get into an engagement where you're being brought in by the people who are paying you to be there. They hired you because you probably did some discovery, because you made some proposals, right? So perhaps that conversation has already happened, but at some point sometimes you start with the leadership team, and then you go from there. You want to conduct an experiment. So you don't start, I don't want to make statements I don't or I never, because I did. But if you are by yourself, if you are one person, you will not be, it's not appropriate, it's not practical to work with a whole organization all at once, unless you have experience and you work with a leadership team. I did work with the leadership teams of 40 people for organizations of 8 to 12,000 people. I never met the 8 to 12,000 people, I only met the 40 people. So it was more like a think tank, but we were doing very similar things, so I would teach the patterns. Then we did workshops for like 2 weeks. We started with the workshop, we started with static, and then I was there for 2 weeks. As a result, that organization, which I have never set foot on their grounds to work with these teams, were able to deliver in the next 9 months. They delivered what they're not able to deliver in 12 months. So they had these yearly statements of work, right? So they're able to deliver in 9 months what they're not able to deliver in 12 months before, because they understood the relationship between the amount of work in progress. They understood theory of constraints and bottlenecks. And again, this was a senior leadership team for a fantastic company. So it's not a unique experiment. I've had this experience several times, and kind of became like a service. Not necessarily that I was advertising, but became like a service I was delivering, right? So yes, what happens when you don't have access to the leadership team and you just deal with a team that has this challenge? So I've had a lot of those examples. Some of them I was doing even like pro bono or not being aware. Like I was working with a client in Minneapolis who was a paying customer, and he really liked what we are doing. And he said, hey, do you mind to meet my godson who is in charge of a team deploying an operating system for this company, which, you know, at the time was number 6 on Fortune 100. So it was the 6th largest company on the New York Stock Exchange. I have no access to leadership. This is a guy, right? It's just the person. It's his godson, right? And we meet over breakfast. I didn't have time. I was flying out of town that day. We meet over breakfast, and with whatever you have in the breakfast area of a hotel, the straws, the saucers, the cups, the sugar packets, and all that stuff, we improvised a little bit and explained the concepts to him. And I said, why don't you look at this? Why don't you look at that? To make a long story short, he had success. It was taking him to deliver an operating system close to 2 years. And, you know, that's an eternity. Whenever you're done with delivering an operating system, you're probably a whole other operating system behind, right, in terms of generation stuff. So he was able to do it in 3 months. He got to 3 months. He got 1 year, he got to 6 months, he got to 3 months, fairly quickly in iterations. The success of that story was so big that I ended up being hired and being brought in by the top leadership of the organization he was part of. So again, it doesn't really, I don't think it matters where you start on who your audience is. For me, it's important to understand what can I do to help, what would work in the context they have, whether it's command and control or more trustworthy leadership. And trust the patterns that Kanban offers. Trust static, trust these patterns, and trust that the people you work with, you will learn from them. Don't think and don't expect to have answers to all the questions because you want. Right? Just go in there with an open mind and open heart, and do what you know. Do what you know with Kanban, and people will find ways to ask better questions that will improve their outcomes.
Okay, thank you. I got some questions also in Q&A, so maybe let's start with the first one. How to find out the answer to the question, do you know how many software developers your organization can manage?
Of course, it's coming from Dimitar. Hi, Dimitar. Miss you. I haven't seen you in a long time. I moved closer to you. Now I'm in Texas. So it's not Washington. It's closer to Bulgaria. If you're still in Bulgaria, you should come and visit. And then when you visit, I will answer your question. Next question. I'm kidding. Do you know how many software developers your organization can manage? I would say that perhaps to get closer to answering that question, I would say, what services do we provide and who's paying for them? Because you may be able to afford more software developers, you may not be able to afford those. So based on the funding, based on what you do, I would rather look at the demand and say, what are the most important things we need to deliver and to whom? And focus on delivering, focusing on what you can make commitments to, and make clear that everything else cannot be a commitment. So it's not a straightforward, simple question, Dimitar, but give me a call, okay? Do you have any advice on how to encourage a team to show enthusiasm, feel ownership, to continue to improve their own process? I struggle to get teams to pay attention beyond the first static workshop. Retros only focus on specific issues, not the underlying process. I don't know, Anonymous, but advice on how to encourage a team to show enthusiasm. To me, I don't encourage people to show enthusiasm. I don't encourage them to show ownership. For me, it's the outcome of the workshop. For me, it's like, if I do the workshop right, people start, by the end of the second day, they have ideas. So here is how I approach it. When I conduct a workshop, I don't consider myself an expert. I don't speak from a position of expertise. I don't tell people what to do. Again, I ask them questions. What's most important thing for you to do right now? And what do you struggle with? What's holding you back? That sets the tone. At Adobe, for example, with the 40 teams that we work, and they are in different countries, in different cultures, and there are different management styles. it's really that focus on helping and meeting them where they are, right? You probably remember that from one of the Kanban principles to meet the clients where they are. You know, we don't try to change responsibility. We don't tell them that what they do is wrong. So come from a position of being of service to your audience, and I think you will be surprised by the results. Often the role of that was Siri. Often the role of line manager is discussed. Any views on that? The role of the line manager. I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Zoran?
We have some, so it was the question repeated from the chat. So I will read the one in the chat. Often conflict of interest between team and line management is mentioned.
Mm-hmm. The conflict between
the team and the line management is mentioned, and any views on the role of line managers?
Yeah, I see the question. Is mentioned, I'm not sure is mentioned by whom, but conflict of interest between the team and the line management. When I conduct this, make sure you include, so the first static exercise where we're asking the team what's holding them back. What I do, I go across the whole value stream. So I didn't drill down into the example, but one of the things you have seen, if you remember on one slide where I was describing static, and then the second part, it had an example, and I said, here's the team downstream from them, the team downstream from them. Well, one of those teams was the leadership team. So when I go and I work with an organization, I try to get like probably something similar to what you call 360 feedback and performance reviews. You want to know all the voices in that system. You want to hear all the voices in the system. And then the system has its own voice. So there is a +1. So if you have 10 people, there are usually 11 voices. So but you try to map that value stream. You try to represent all those voices to create visibility. And I don't care. Yeah, I walk into conflictual situations. I'm not there to resolve conflict. I'm there I create visibility, and then people align behind that visibility and the problems they're trying to solve. The role of the line managers. The role of the line managers, yeah, it's a huge topic. I see another question. How long is a typical workshop you conduct? From Camelia Kodarcha. I assume she's Romanian, so I use Romanian pronunciation. Have you been in a context where teams are really busy and they are reluctant to have a workshop? Yeah, all the time. It happened here. So we used to have a workshop. We're doing them 2 days in person, and then people said, you know, we really have to ramp up 8 teams for a mission critical thing. You know, can you do this in half a day? And the answer was like, well, what are you trying to accomplish? And how do you think that's going to be possible to accomplish in 4 hours with people I've never met? I have no idea what they want from me. So I politely declined. And now I'm not a consultant anymore. I was declining someone who was several levels above me. So but you have to explain the value. So I explained the value. What are you trying to accomplish? And then again, I went back to questions. Well, if you try to accomplish this, would you like to have collaboration? Would you like to have engagement? Would you like to have teams that self-manage? Would you like to have teams that are able to quickly diagnose what's holding them back? And, you know, how do you work and what are you used to? And how much work do you have in progress? So I take the conversation necessarily like to try to create some visibility and to help and to show support for what that person is trying to accomplish. What we ended up doing, instead of doing 2 half days, we ended up doing 3 half days. So this is a myth about the team is too busy. Yeah, you're too busy doing things that don't lead you to any better results. It happens a lot, Camelia. And I believe you reached out to me on LinkedIn. I think I've seen that message this morning, so we can have a conversation around that. How long is the typical workshop you conduct? I would say 2 days. If it's in person, I prefer 2 days. Even if it's online, the toll on people is different. I prefer 3 half days over, so over 3 days, maybe 4 or 5 hours. If it's in person, then about 7 hours, 2 days in a row with lunch breaks and things. That's my approach.
So I think the time is almost up. So thank you very much for all of these wonderful questions. I can see there are some questions that we didn't answer, but we really encourage you to send them over email. And if possible, we are happy to answer them over email. Or we always, make some blog posts out of these questions.
Anna, I encourage you to collect all these questions.
Yes, we will.
We have a very short time, so it's like a lot of work in process, right? We're trying to get too much done. We didn't have a prioritization process, and also we didn't have any team agreements around, how to structure the questions. So that's fine. But Anna, collect all these questions, and I'm happy to brainstorm with you and have like an FAQ that you can distribute to the audience later on.
Sure, of course I will. This is what we always do. And guys, if you didn't have a chance to ask the question, you can always send it to us, as we mentioned. We'll be in touch with you over email. Dragos, thank you very much one more time. It was great to meet you again and listen to you. Thanks everyone who attended, and see you soon.
And I want to say hello, Martin and Gabriele. Hope to see you soon again.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.